On the only podcast that I'll hear that won't make me want to rip off my ears. Oh, the Rock Show, 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 all on the Rock Show.
Let's go.
All right.
Hey, everybody. This is Rocker Mike. We got Rob Rossi right there. And this is the Rock Show, the big 200th episode. Whoa. We have a special guest today, Mr. Jim Basnight on the bottom there. How you doing, Jim?
I'm doing pretty good, my friends. It's good to be here.
Good. Welcome back. This is your second appearance on our show.
You guys did a great job last time. I know what's going on here. You guys are my rockers in New York City.
Okay, thanks. Appreciate it. For those who don't know Jim, we did interview him. I want to say, I think about a year and a half ago, if I remember right. Jim was in a band called the Mobileys. He started off in that in the late 70s. Mm-hmm. He's had a fantastic solo career. He's played with everybody under the sun. He's got a head for musical knowledge, kind of like me. Okay. Yeah. And he's the reason he's on today. We're going to have a little special show here. Is we're going to talk about the blues, which is all so important to the history of rock and roll.
Absolutely.
In particular, we'll be talking about two blues artists. One is Sonny Boy Williamson, actually Sonny Boy Williamson II. Okay, right. We'll get into the distinction there, and also another guy named Hound Dog, who's a little less well known but quite interesting.
What was his whole name? Hound Dog Taylor?
Hound Dog Taylor. Yeah.
Right. He was a Mississippi guy, but came up through Chicago, and we'll talk about that. He's had one of the first electrified blues guys. Now, Jim, I know, and you explained this a little more last time, but let's just kind of recap this. I know you've been involved for quite some time putting a book together about Sonny Boy.
That's right. As a matter of fact, on top of that, a documentary, and in fact, I was involved with developing a screenplay based on the story too. And I may work on and do something with both of those projects at some point. But the documentary more than likely. But yes, what I did was I started working on that. Basically 12 years ago. And what happened was I was working in sports journalism publishing as a side thing, along with doing my music gigs, because I didn't have to be in an office. I just did it all on the net, doing a couple of different sports gigs, and learned journal. I never studied journalism in school, and I kind of learned journalism practically that way. And then I got this job, which relayed more to who I am as a musician and all that stuff. I still love sports and whatnot, but music's been my primary thing. And so I got that job. It wasn't really a job. It was sort of an offer to be a sort of a research partner in this research thing about Sonny Boy Williamson with some people that I knew. And then as time went on, the guy that ran that and had the financing, he passed away. He had a lot of health issues, and I took it over and had to go out and get some new financing and such as that. And so that's kind of one reason it's taken a long time. There's a lot of other reasons. I don't really want to get into all of them, but it's taken an awful long time. But in the meantime, I've really learned a lot and done a lot of study on this whole subject of Sonny Boy's life and everything, all the details about it, which are very hard to come by for a lot of reasons. But the other side of it is just the story of the music that led up to our lives, the stuff that we are all about. And, I got a transistor radio probably before you guys were born in like 1965. And that's where I kind of came into it and actually started loving rock and roll. And Sonny Boy died in 65. So I kind of look at this as being the story of everything that led up to this thing that's been so important and vital in my life.
That's fantastic because let me just put this in the form of a question. What do you think is the reason that blues music, okay, prior to the 1950s and the beginning of rock and roll, why do you think that was so important to rock and roll music today and in the past?
Well, you know something, I think that in general, the African American music tradition is to American music what the English language is to the American lexicon and American literature. It's the basic building blocks of it. And
Right.
and everything is sort of was built on that. It was mixed with all kinds of other influences, of course, especially European instruments and all kinds of other traditional European and other influences as well. But you know, it really is sort of the basics. And whether you're talking about ragtime or just going back to the minstrel shows, even in you know, Civil War days and all that stuff, it's always been sort of a touchstone for American music culture that sort of, you know, from ragtime to jazz to, you know, to swing to, you know, of course, what the word R&B was invented to sort of as a marketing term of, you know, basically amplified blues, which is what Sonny Boy and these guys in that generation more or less you know, innovated and originated. And then from R&B, the word rock and roll, which was sort of a touchstone of trying to make rhythm and blues sound more young and more of the youth market.
Well, it was a sexual connotation too, right?
And of course, the sexual connotation. Everybody knew what rock and roll meant, of course.
Yeah.
And it also had a racial connotation too, because rocking the boat was a term that was used in the African American community of just people that were pushing the envelope of segregation and stuff like that. So it was kind of a combination of both, and it was about integration, and it was also sexual and sure. and such as that. And so, but it was, and then rock and roll, of course, you know, was separated into three categories in the early part of my life, or probably I wasn't aware of it even. It was way before I was aware of any of this stuff. Became rock, soul or R&B, and country or country and western. It was like three separate things, but it all kind of came from the same thing because the country artists started playing electric guitars and drums before that they really hadn't done that. That came from rockabilly. And as those rockabilly artists got older, they brought those influences from electric blues that they learned
right.
Into country music. And of course, R&B was basically just, you know, amplified blues. And of course it merged with other forms like gospel and of course the popular music of the day and all that kind of stuff. So all that stuff sort of comes from the same thing, and it really does root to electric blues. It really is sort of the basic building blocks, the foundation that gave birth to R&B, then rock and roll, then all those three of those other things. And of course, those three other things now include hip hop and, you know, all kinds of other subgenres and whatever, psychedelic and alternative and
right.
I always love Leadbelly. Leadbelly was a big guy like that too.
Oh yeah. Well, that's another important factor in this. Some of the early researchers of the blues way back in the early 20th century found that some of the best songs they heard were people that were incarcerated, that were in what they used to call farms. They were like county and state farms, which is forced labor, and they were chain gangs, exactly. And they were horrible places. They were similar to what Stalin was doing in Russia. And basically, what they found was some of the best songs were from people that were never heard from again. Leadbelly was one of the very few who was involved in that kind of operation, but at the same time survived. And his name is known, and his songs are known. Some of those people actually may have written songs that are famous for other people, because a lot of times people would have a song and they just give it. They were in there and nothing that could be done. So someone else who wasn't in a farm, or we call it a prison, I guess, would take that song and play it and do it themselves. Right. You know, so that's the other part about the blues that's very interesting, is that it's kind of a language that, you know, borrows and steals from each other to the point where it's hard to know who came up with these classic songs.
It's very grassroots and DIY, to use a modern term. Okay. You know, in the same way that you know, in the 70s, like punk rock was DIY Okay,
That's
and
right.
grassroots.
Absolutely.
All right,
Absolutely.
blues was a very similar thing. You may not think of it that way, but it actually comes from the same place, in my opinion.
Absolutely, very much. I think punk and blues and all that stuff. It all comes from the same place. It's just American roots music that has gone through changes because of technology. You know,
True.
like
Technology has lots
Iggy Pop said in "Search and Destroy." I've got a hot foot. What is it? Something
I'm a
about
street
technology.
walking cheetah.
And there's a high foot and A-bomb. I'm Ruone, son of nuclear A-bomb. World's forgotten boy.
The one who
Search and destroys. Look out, honey, because I'm using technology.
Technology. Look out, honey. I mean, yeah, it's a great line.
And it's
The
true.
whole song is
Technology is really the basis of what happened. I mean, electric guitars came in. Sonny Boy's guitar player on King Biscuit Time, which was the first real blues radio show in 1941, he got a pickup out of the Montgomery Ward catalog in like the late 30s, and that was just starting to happen. And that's what happened. It's the electric guitars, and then because of microphones and electric guitars, amplification, kit drums were more usable, because before, when it was just acoustic guitars, from music, if you got no PA and someone's playing drums, that's all you can hear is the drums.
Yeah.
But when they had amplification, then you can bring drums into the picture.
Yeah, you could hear everything. Yeah.
So
give us a little background on Sonny Boy Williamson. Now we're really going to talk about Sonny Boy Williamson the second.
Yes.
There was a Sonny Boy Williamson the first, though.
That's correct. I'll give you the breakdown on that one.
Sure.
Sonny Boy Williamson was the name of John Lee Williamson, who was born in Jackson, Tennessee in 1914. He had a recording career on the Bluebird label and then also the RCA label later in his career. The Bluebird was the race label for RCA Victor, and then he moved over and did some records with RCA as well later on. But he was sort of the name that most people associated with a singing harmonica and vocal and harmonica singer, front man at that point. They're all men doing the blues. And so, but thing is, at that time with technology, was all you would really know about Sonny Boy, unless you actually knew him, for most part, would be the fact that you'd see his name on jukeboxes. So no one really knew that much about who he was or what he looked like. They just knew that Sonny Boy records would play on jukeboxes and people would hear him, and that was the blues. So what happened was, he had this career going. He was based in Chicago. He was from the South, but he really didn't go down to that much. He mostly played in Chicago in the Midwest, and had records out. Okay. And records back then were much different than they became in our lifetime. So most people didn't own records. They just listened to records on jukeboxes.
Right.
So basically what happened was, when Alex Miller, who was born that's Sonny Boy 2, he was born in Greenwood, not Greenwood, Miss. He was born in Glendora, Mississippi, on a plantation. Then his parents moved when he was 1 year old, give or take, to another plantation in Money, Mississippi, where he lived until he was 17 years old when he left home just to play music exclusively. Left the cotton world and got into just being musician slash basically underworld character, because it was sort of illegal and very discouraged for someone to be an independent musician in that circumstance. So basically what he did was he was born at that time, and he was known as Alex Miller by his family, but at a very early age, he earned the name Rice. Almost everybody in his family had a nickname. His name was Rice. It was given to him by his older brother, who was just a few years older than him. Because he liked rice so much. So they called him Rice, and some of his friends started calling him Rice, and he sort of went by Rice. And he played music for a while around that whole region of Greenwood is the biggest town nearby, but Money, Mississippi, and that whole region around Greenwood. And he played, and he extended out and traveled around. And while he was living at home with his parents and supposedly engaged with the cotton business and sharecropping, but mostly just traveled around, tried to play music until his dad got tired of it and kicked him out when he was 17. And then he went out and just continued playing on the road and sort of had to blend in with the population. He had to sort of be able to pose as someone who was working for a white guy, or had some way of, or he would get in trouble. They had laws down there like vagrancy and jaywalking, and what they really were excuses to pull people aside, and if they didn't have a white person that they were working for, they would put them in these county farms. Like
these were Jim Crow type things.
Yeah, they put them in the county farm, and if you were in a county farm, you probably didn't live longer than maybe a few months, unless you were really, really strong and stout. Maybe you lived like a year or so, but it was really horrible circumstances. So what happened was the county farm was a deterrent. So you'd beg to come out and go back and pick cotton or whatever they wanted you to do. So basically, long and short of it was he lived in this life and posed as farm laborer or whatever, or got together with usually women that would sort of put him up, and he'd kind of live, and he'd go out and travel and play music. And if somebody accosted him about who he was or what he was, he had sort of a story that he would have to tell about who he's working for, why he's there playing harmonica. But over time, he became very successful at this and made a lot of people that liked his music. And he started working for people that had river boats and gambling dens, and of course he worked in the juke joints and all those kinds of things that were going on back then. Even though Mississippi alcohol was illegal, as long as you paid the sheriff, everything was legal.
Yeah.
So so pretty much the same as today.
Yeah.
Exactly. You pay the sheriff enough, everything is legal. So basically, what he did was he traveled around. He made a pretty big name for himself, and he was able to support himself. But he was still understanding of the fact that he was living in a system that was dangerous.
Yeah.
And he met a lot of other people along the way. Robert Johnson was one.
Yeah, Robert Johnson.
Another big name that he met and had a very close relationship was Howlin' Wolf, and he married Howlin' Wolf's sister, although we've yet to find a marriage certificate. There's a wedding photo, but Howlin' Wolf said they were married, so I guess it's probably true. And he also married at least one. We have a marriage certificate, a woman before that, and probably two other women before that. And he just traveled around playing music and sort of living this kind of dual lifestyle, kind of clandestine lifestyle of changing his name, I guess, wherever he went, to kind of not letting people know who he was too well. And he sort of got in this habit of changing his name where he went. But his friends knew him as Rice Miller. Well, he ran into a problem in 1938, according to his family, that shared this to me and really hadn't shared this to anybody else because they were afraid of it. That he was involved with some quote unquote bad white men. And I assume that means that they were doing something that even the sheriff, if they found out about it, wouldn't have approved of. And so what happened was he got in a fight when they tried to take his money, apparently, or something like that, late at night after a show. And he knifed one of them to get away. And they didn't tell the authorities, which tells me that they're probably afraid the sheriff would catch up to him first, and then he'd tell them what they were up to or something like that. Right. But they shook his family down and threatened the kids and all this other kinds of stuff. And the one sister who was closest to him, although he really wasn't that close to her because she didn't like his music because she was a real church lady, but sweet lady, I'm sure, but really heavily religious. Basically, they went to her house, and her two daughters told me the whole story. They were 6 and 8 years old at the time. And these two white men like threatened them and all this other kind of stuff, but they didn't really know where he was. He got away and he never came back to that area, and he changed and he went and continued doing harmonica, but he played everywhere else but there for a long time until including as far north as Illinois, where he actually ran away immediately because he wanted to get away to make sure these guys didn't find him. And then once he was up there for a while and he felt like the coast was clear, he moved back to Helena, Arkansas, which was sort of this port town on the Mississippi River, which had a large black community of people that worked on the docks and stuff like that. And he could kind of blend in there pretty easily. And a lot of other musicians based themselves out of there too, like Robert Johnson did it at times as well, and others. But basically he moved back down there, and within about a year of just continuing this lifestyle of traveling around, usually with other musicians, they do it together. Like one of them would be on one side of a street corner in a main part of town. The other one would be kitty corner on the other side of the street corner. And they'd work together, but they'd be separate because there'd be more tips because of the street traffic on both sides,
Okay.
So exactly, they were smart guys. So basically, they went and did this, and he got this radio station in Helena said that well, they were just coming into business. It was a sports thing too. They were funded by the University of Arkansas sports, basketball and football and baseball. They had the broadcast those games. That was like one of the big accounts. And then they had this radio station, but they had to try to fill it up, and they needed to fill it up with programming. And this flour company was trying to sell their flour, and he convinced the station and the flour company to use the blues on a show, because the population within the signal was actually about 70% or 80% African Americans. So he said, look, the blues will work. And of course, this met with a lot of negative attitude from the Chamber of Commerce, and of course the underworld of the Klan, or whatever you want to call those people. Yeah. But basically, the station and the flour company guy said, "Look, this is just temporary, because it was just the World War II was just starting, and this needs to be something we can do to sell this flour, and you guys all have black people coming in your stores and whatnot, so this is just temporary. Then we'll make radio all white again, But it was so successful that basically it spread, and he went and got different sponsors in other towns like Clarksdale, Mississippi, and Yazoo City, Mississippi, and Belzoni, and Greenville, and Monroe, Louisiana, and West Memphis, Arkansas, which tapped into the Memphis market, which was a huge market,
right?
And Jackson, Mississippi, and as far as Hugo, Oklahoma, and a couple other situations, Little Rock, Arkansas. And so he traveled all around and kind of created these shows, and he couldn't be in all places at all times. And he got some of his friends' shows, like Howlin' Wolf helped him get his show in West Memphis, and B.B. King helped him get started on radio, and a variety of other names that are less noteworthy but important. Basically kind of got this whole idea of these blues shows. And by 1948, 7 years later, the first all-black, radio formatted station opened, because it had been proven to be such a moneymaker to do these kinds of shows. And it featured, blues basically 6 days a week, and then gospel on Sundays, gospel stuff on Sunday, the black gospel stuff on Sundays. So that was the beginning of that kind of style of radio station in 48. And that spread, because that was so successful, that spread to major markets across the country.
Let me jump in for a second here, Jim. I got a question.
I keep going forever. You need to just cut me off.
No, it's fascinating. What you're describing to me sounds like probably what artists like Hank Williams or even Johnny Cash might have been listening to prior to them getting started.
Absolutely. Johnny Cash was right there. He was right there.
Influences there.
The Sun Records, the whole Sun Records thing was very much influenced by this. And Johnny was, of course, on Sun Records, as was Elvis and Jerry Lee and a variety of others. But basically what happened is that Sun Records was based upon the fact that Sam Phillips could see the marketing and how much these young white kids, and just not white kids, but just general audiences love this music. And he felt like if this could be presented,
it was white
people. But the bottom line, it was his idea was, if he could find a white kid that could sound black and really do this stuff and really do it good, he could make $1 million. Well, he found Elvis, and Elvis came into his label trying to get a record deal as a gospel artist. And he said, it's okay, but you're not, you got to need a few years before you're going to be able to compete with, this or that guy. And then he said, well, look, I can do country. So he did the songs he learned from listening to the Grand Ole Opry. And he said, that's pretty good. You're kind of, it's good. But then he goes, I know some blues. And he kind of pricked up his ears, and he goes, what do you got? So he sang 2 songs that were songs by Sonny Boy's guitar player, Arthur Crudup, who performed with Sonny Boy on KWEM in West Memphis, and would travel around with him, play with him. And he'd always feature his band members on his shows. He'd sing songs, but he'd also feature guests and band members on his shows. And Arthur Crudup used to do 2 songs that were That's All Right, Mama and My Baby Left Me. And those were those are the two songs that got Elvis's record deal, because he learned those songs from listening to those radio shows with his friend Ronald Smith, who was another guitar player. They were 13 and 14 years old, and they listened to KWEM and Sonny Boy and Howlin' Wolf shows also. Sonny Boy got Howlin' Wolf a show on the same station with a different sponsor. But basically, Sonny Boy had a lot to do with introducing blues to the radio, which influenced a whole generation of young, basically teenagers, that by the time 1954, 55, 56 came around, when rock and roll really hit, had already sort of developed a style, that was heavily influenced by the blues, as well as, of course, the Grand Ole Opry and gospel to some degree,
Yeah, and what I find so fascinating too about the blues is really how the British picked up on it in a totally different way. In America, and we mentioned this briefly, is there was a racial component to this.
Yes.
There was still segregation in the South, and even in the North, it was considered a race record if you were listening to black artists.
Well, that's what they actually called it. They called it race music.
I knew that, race record, and maybe your parents didn't take too highly to that as if you were a young white teenager listening to it. Yeah. But in England, in the 50s, late 50s, I would say about that time, it kind of like turned into an underground scene, which didn't have that racial component to it. It had kind of like a hip and cool, you're the cool kid on the block listening to this. There's that famous story of how Mick Jagger and Keith Richards knew each other as kids but hadn't seen each other in a long time, and then in like 1960 or something like that, 61, they run into each other as older teenagers, and Keith tells the story like, "Oh yeah, I haven't seen you in a while. How you doing? Hey, but what's with that Howlin' Wolf record under your arm?" That's really more what he was interested in. What's with that Chuck Berry record under your arm? Okay?
It was the same for the rockabilly artists too. Like Paul McCartney auditioned for the John Lennon's band. I think it was called the Quarrymen. And reason that John Lennon thought he was just this little squirt that was just some pretty boy that was not cool and tough like him. But then he pulled out the guitar and played 20 Flight Rock by Eddie Cochran. Yeah. and he goes, well, this guy's cool, So it was just the American music, American roots music, rock and roll, blues, especially the blues, and also of course rockabilly. Like I said, it all comes from the same place. Was the touchstones for these British rockers. And had it not been for the Beatles and also these other bands like the Stones and the Animals and all that kind of stuff, rock and roll, who knows what would have happened, because there was a real concerted effort in American politics that sort of needed to be kept away from the mainstream.
Well, they drafted Elvis. Jerry Lee Lewis had the scandal with marrying his cousin.
Chuck Berry. Chuck
Berry was always in trouble with the Mann Act and all that.
The little girls, exactly.
Little girls, right? And then you had Johnny Cash with his drug problem. Okay. Even though he was more country at the time, but what you were seeing at that period was, rock and roll was kind of going in the background. And you were getting like these rock and roll light acts like the Avalon and Fabian and these kind of like teen idol types. Some of that stuff was cool. Ricky Nelson was in the middle of that, and he was great. But a lot of it was really kind of like a watering down of what you'd seen in the mid 50s and late 50s.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, the Beatles and the Stones come along, and the Yardbirds and the Animals, like you say. And they just amped everything up again, and it was never the same. I mean, you had the girl groups too in the United States that were huge, and as soon as the Beatles came, they couldn't get a gig. They were wiped off the map, but the British acts took people like Sonny Boy Williamson, okay.
Well, Sonny Boy played a big role in this, and I'm not ready to cut you off. I want to make a point that before I forget. And so what happened was, Sonny Boy moved over to England in 1963. He went over there to play at the American Folk Blues Festival with a whole bunch of really great acts. The second one, after this, it was actually the third one. It was in 1962. Was the first of the concurrent ones, but there was also something earlier than that. But yeah, basically he went out there. And he decided to stay because they loved him so much. He'd been playing kind of, the blues had kind of been pushed out of the way by rock and roll. And he was kind of relegated to playing some pretty out of the way gigs in the States, as were all the other blues artists of that classic era. They were kind of out of vogue, and mostly who supported them were older black audiences. Basically, he went over there, and he was all these kids loving him, and all these records were getting played in all these hip discotheques, and people were coming and paying big money and to see him in these theaters and stuff like that. So he said, heck, I'm just going to stay here. So he went over there and he hooked up with this guy named Giorgio Gomelski, who was his parents were refugees from the communism from the Eastern Bloc and
Europe. Yeah.
And he was a sort of a hipster that sort of started in a lot of ways the blues scene in London.
With the Yardbirds, right?
And he was the manager of the Rolling Stones, the original manager of the Rolling Stones, and he got them their first gigs at this club called the Crawdaddy Club, and he put them together and kind of got them happening. And then they left him, but he moved over to the Yardbirds, and that was Eric Clapton's band. Of course, at that time he was 18 and whatnot. But the first thing that they did was this: they backed Sonny Boy Williamson on this live album that he produced, Giorgio produced. So Sonny Boy was managed by Giorgio after when he decided to stay. Giorgio kind of took him on his wing, and he set him up playing with all these bands, and these young bands who claimed they wanted to be blues artists, and then also more established bands like Chris Barber's band, which was like a jazz band, but they were older, more accomplished musicians that also dug the blues, and also a little bit older artists like John Mayall and Brian Auger, who were a little bit more, accomplished musicians slightly. But the bottom line was he just hooked Sonny Boy, whoever was out there that was trying to play the blues, and Sonny Boy just went with it because for him, he'd already been kind of like Chuck Berry, a self-contained. He'd go from town to town, play with whoever he happened to be with, or the best thing he could come up with. Sometimes it wasn't all that good, but he'd just do his thing. And if he really hated him, he'd just kick him off the stage and do the show by himself, So he was already a self-contained, just a suitcase and a hat and a suit, kind of on the road kind of a act anyway. So it worked out well for him to go from town to town, to Newcastle, to Manchester, to Liverpool, to all these towns in England, and play with whatever band was the best band there, whether they be the Moody Blues or the Animals or the Yardbirds and so on and so forth. So he played with Joe Cocker's original band. He played with Rod Stewart's original band. He played with just tons of artists that later became famous. And most of these artists ended up recording a lot of his tunes after he died, and a couple before he died, even like the Moody Blues. But what happened was he influenced these artists so much. It's just amazing. I've talked to a lot of them, and not necessarily the big stars, but some of the people that were in their bands and stuff like that, some of the big stars. And he was a huge influence. And it's kind of a weird sort of a two-screen dichotomy. While these young British artists were taking this American roots music to America and introducing to a whole new generation of kids and giving it all this new importance that it really didn't have, these artists were looking to him, and so he was their focus. We over here, the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, were our focus. But for those Beatles and the Rolling Stones and all these bands, he was their focus. He was like, they were trying to learn from him. And he was doing TV shows. He was appearing almost every night in some club with somebody. And he just gave it all he had. And unfortunately, he had a real bad alcohol problem. So he went from drinking, the kind of booze he could get, Old Crow and, Jim Beam, stuff like that over here, the cheap stuff, to drinks like Johnny Walker Black and fancy booze over there. And it's probably what killed him, although he probably would have died anyway.
People were probably buying him drinks all night.
He was a hardcore alcoholic. He started drinking heavy when he was 17, and he pretty much drank like a hard fifth of liquor or more every day the rest of his entire life. So he died when he was about 51. He looked like 52. He looked to be about 70, but yeah, that's how old he
Yeah,
was.
I've seen pictures. He definitely did not look his age.
And the thing is, that's the other side of this that's so tragic and so wonderful about what we have to deal with today, is that there's so little actual footage of him playing live, except for when he's really, really old. But if you can imagine what a great artist he was when he was really at his peak and he was younger, it's too bad there's no footage of that. There's very little, there's silent footage and that's it. Like one little teeny clip.
That's the one sad thing about the, all the blues music is there's just so little out there of video or whatever. But even like in the early 40s, I think the United States Library of Congress started categorizing these things, cataloging it, I should say.
Yep.
Okay. And they went down to the South looking for some of these people. And I know Son House that happened with, and there were other recordings that for the Library of Congress that we have.
Muddy Waters. Yeah.
Muddy Waters was one. Right.
Before he was famous. Yeah.
Right. And, and Muddy's a great example too, because, the Stones took their name from one of his songs.
Absolutely.
And then he had a whole, second fantastic career because of that.
That's right.
Everybody knew who he was.
Yeah. That's
one
right.
story I loved about Muddy, it's real quick, is whenever he went into a town with his band, the hookers used to go crazy. Okay, because they knew it was like a huge night for them.
Well, that's and the thing is, Sonny Boy, that was his lifestyle, and it was he made money because he was the best at what he did, and he was the biggest attraction because of his radio shows down south, but he would blow it all. What he couldn't blow on girls and booze, he blew at the gambling table. So he would just blow all the money he ever made.
Wow.
And so that was another thing of it. But the thing is, you have to also look at it from this standpoint. These guys, whatever it was that put them in this position, they were the ones that did it. So it's hard to blame them for their lifestyles, because who knows, maybe if he was a good businessman, somebody would have said, this guy's getting too tough and too big for me. I'm just going to knock him off. He was vulnerable to the point where they knew if you just gave him a bottle of booze and a chick, and that you could take all his money away from him. So they just let him do what he did. But if he was someone who really wanted to do something, like for instance, Sam Cooke. Mm-hmm. Sam Cooke was a guy who went out there, wanted to form his own label and cut his own deal. And unfortunately, some bad people probably ended up killing him for that.
We did a show on him. I think it was last year, 23 for Black History Month. We did a show on Sam Cooke, and I knew the story, but there was a lot of things I didn't know. Dug and digging into it, and there's just no way he was not targeted there.
It was obvious as can be.
Absolutely. Did Sonny Boy Williamson II have any kids?
That's another great story. That's going to be all in my book. People here are getting a lot of value if they're actually students of this stuff, because I'm dropping a lot of new information.
You don't have to go into detail. Just did he have?
I'm going to tell you about because I love you guys. Here's what it is. I found it. He did have a son, and believe it or not, his son ended up in Tacoma, Washington.
Oh wow.
And his son was through a woman named Ardell Baker, who he didn't marry. But after he died in 1965, he knew he was Alex Miller, or at that point, Sonny Boy Williamson's son. And so he went back to Milwaukee, where Sonny Boy Williamson's heir lived. And that was her name was Maddie. It was his wife, legal wife. And her daughter, Olivia, who became his heir after when Maddie passed away. Even though Olivia was her daughter, but not his daughter, it was his stepdaughter. And he explained to them, who he was and why he was Sonny Boy's son, and they helped him. They kept in touch with him and invited him over for birthdays and holidays and took care of him and kind of helped him. And he lived in Milwaukee the rest of his life, and he had a huge weight problem, and he passed away in 1972. 2, I believe it was,
Right.
or something like that. But he lived for a while in Milwaukee, and they cared for him. He's the only one I knew who was biological kid. Sonny Boy told people he had a bunch of kids, but I don't know of any other than that.
Interesting.
And I suspect that he was probably Sonny Boy's real child.
Okay,
Yeah.
so before we shift gears to Hound Dog Taylor, when is this book coming out? Do you have a date or any?
Well, I'll tell you what, it's been a real effort on my part, and I've got it to the point now where I've finished the research, at least for now. I mean, so if something little comes in, I'm sure I'll be able to add it. And I'm just basically going through all the chapters and adding the research that I've done in the interim since I sent this off to a wonderful person who helped me fact check this, a guy by the name of Jim O'Neill, who co-founded Living Blues magazine in 1970 when he was only 20 years old. And he kind of still runs things there and has access to all these interviews, published and unpublished, and books and everything, and of course music to do with blues history. So he's probably the most capable person to do that for me. So he went through all my research and fact checked it along with what he had, and did a bunch of editing for me and analysis of what I was doing, and then gave it all back to me. Fortunately, it took a couple of years for him to do that. It took over 2 years for him to do that because he was suffering from some health issues and had to have chemotherapy and stuff. Yeah. So basically, he got that done, and that was delivered back to me in July of 2023. And since then, I've been dealing with, of course, that's at the busiest time of my life because I make my living playing music. So summer's really busy. So it took me a while to be able to get everything together. Plus I had a whole bunch of research that I had been doing while he had it, that I was kind of waiting to get back from him to see what he had. And then I've gone through all that to collect and get all the updated information that I've been able to come up with, and also do a lot of the recommendations of things for me to look into that he gave me. So I've done all that kind of stuff and put it all into chapters alongside the chapters of the manuscript that he's got, and then alongside all the comments that he gave me. And I'm in the process of merging those into making one solid document manuscript. And once that's finished, and I'm working on that right now. Once that's finished, it's completed. And then at that point, I'm going to start the publishing side of it. And I know it's going to be published because there's a lot of interest in it.
Oh, absolutely.
The question is whether I'm going to be able to afford to do a deal that I'm offered. So we'll see what kind of offers come in, because I have people that have invested in me, and I can't just give this away, you know.
Yeah.
So it's business. It's a business too, unfortunately.
Yeah.
All right, so let's hope that maybe in the next year or so we see something. But
I'm thinking realistically, I could finish this process pretty soon because I have a lot of help now with a lot of my music business stuff. One of the guys in my band has really been helping me out with business stuff. I think you got an email from him already, probably, Sean Peabody.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so he's helping me out with booking gigs and with my music releases and stuff like that. And I'm also recording a new album too, which we can talk about in a minute.
You're always recording something.
Yeah, I'm working on a new album right now. It's really going really well too. Sean played drums on it and sang, and his wife Beth is going to be coming in here next month and doing all her harmony vocals, and a guy by the name of Bruce Hazen, who played on a lot of my stuff and I played with for many years. He's really cool. Is doing a bunch of guitar with me, and then Gary Shelton, who's the engineer and co-producer, is also the bass player. So we got this pretty tight little outfit, and there may be some other guests on it too, but that I'm working on too. So I got two things going between the book and this, and I'm really able to focus on the book. And I think the book is I would guess I'm going to be done with going through all these chapters and putting all this thing together a lot sooner than people think. It's a big job. It's like a 500-page manuscript, but now that everything's in order, it's just one chapter after another, and I'm making good progress. I could see this being done before the really heavy part of summer hits, like say in sometime in June, Okay. Yeah. So at that point, I'm still having to go through the process of getting it published. So it's going to take some time still. Wow. But I think it'll happen it'll happen sooner than people think. It's taken me a long time, but I don't think it's going to take another big chunk of time. I think it's going to start. Things are going to start clicking here. So that's the answer to the question. Sorry about all the details, but that's
no, we appreciate it. Hound Dog Taylor. Now, this is a guy that I'm kind of not super familiar with, and I know my blues stuff pretty good, but this is one of these guys. I know he was one of the first electrified blues guys. Okay. Played in Chicago mostly, right? He was, I guess he played other places, but I think he was known mostly for Chicago.
Yeah, he moved to Chicago. He claimed because the KKK was after him because he got caught.
There was a story where he claimed the KKK. Yeah. Give us a little background on him.
Well,
whatever you know.
Yeah, well, he's a very interesting character, and he's a controversial character. He claimed that he actually was the one who composed "Dust My Broom," which some people think is kind of heresy. Everyone thinks it was Robert Johnson, and then of course Elmore James learned it. Some people think it was Elmore James, and Robert Johnson learned from him. There's a lot of controversy there, and it tends to shade more towards that Hound Dog may have not been telling the truth about that, but it also is hard to really prove either way. And he was around for all this stuff. He claims he was on King Biscuit Time. He appeared on King Biscuit Time with Sonny Boy Williamson too, and that's hard to prove. But I think he was definitely there at the time. He played with Willie Love and Sonny Boy and all these other guys.
This was in England, Jim.
What's that?
He played with him in King Biscuit in England.
That's what. Well, no, not in England. No, he came. King Biscuit was. We're talking back in the 40s in
my mistake. Okay.
Yeah. So he was around the early days of this stuff, and he was there. So Lord knows what he did. He might have done an awful lot. He has a book that's been out for a year now, and I just ordered it. And I have to be honest, I haven't read it yet. And I'm looking forward to reading it, seeing what he's got to say. But I've seen reports from it, and it seems like, he's made a lot of the same claims before. And his story is, I just have to wait and see. So I recommend getting the book if you haven't got the book. There's a book about him.
The question for me is, do you believe a guy that would cut his own finger off? Okay.
I believe in Hound Dog Taylor because I listen to his music and I hear a guy that really was an innovator.
Yeah.
And you could tell it was in his soul. And I don't see anybody doing this stuff. He may have embellished on some of his stories. I know Sonny Boy basically did nothing but lie his entire life. And that was because he was trying to cover up for the fact that he had a past he was trying to make sure he could distinguish himself from.
Well, let me just kind of jump in for 1 second.
Okay.
My reference to the cutting the finger off, probably just no one knows what the hell I'm talking about.
Okay.
He was born with a sixth finger on one of his hands.
That's right.
I don't know if it was both. I think it was one of his hands. And he actually backstage one night cut it off with a razor blade.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Wow. That's wild.
It's crazy.
Yeah, I think so. And the thing is, all this stuff is legend and, it's hard to prove. But I'll tell you what, Hound Dog Taylor, on the surface, if you listen to his music, it's real. It's very real. Absolutely. He was legitimate. I mean, and the thing is, he played the blues, and he really was an innovator because you listen to his guitar playing, and there's not a lot of daylight between him and Johnny Thunders. You know what I'm saying? He's just a legitimate rock and roller all the way.
Wow. Absolutely. And it's funny you mentioned that because when I was Jim, and for people who don't know, me and Jim were friends on Facebook, and sometimes he'll comment on. I post music every night, so I had posted some shit from Hound Dog, and that night it actually occurred to me. I said, "I bet Thunders heard this guy."
Oh, I'm sure he did. Thunders was heavily into the blues. Thunders, he quotes the blues all the time. I mean, the Dolls did Hoochie Coochie Man, of course, and I know Johansson was a heavy blues guy. According to Sylvain, Johansson was the reason why they did "Don't Start Me Talking" by Sonny Boy Williamson. Yes. But basically, then you go from that to Johnny's career, and Johnny was, he was in the Rolling Stones. Like, he may have gotten his love for the blues from artists like the Rolling Stones and the Yardbirds like that. But he was legitimately. He said he saw Howlin' Wolf. At least he claimed to in that song, "Hoodoo Voodoo."
Yeah.
And but anyway, he Spoonful as part of a medley with Who Do You Love?
I remember that. Yep.
He did Bright Lights Big City by Jimmy Reed.
Yep.
And Spider and the Fly, which is a Rolling Stones song, sort of like a Jimmy Reed song, in a medley with this song, Just Because I'm White, Why Do You Treat Me Like a N-Word? And then he also did Help Me by Sonny Boy, in a song called Talking About You, that's on that expanded version of Que Sera Sera album.
Right. He breaks into those verses.
You gotta help me, baby. I can't do it all by myself.
Yep. Well, real quick about Thunders is a lot of people don't know this, is when he was about, before the Dolls, I think he must have been about 18. He just left home and went to England. Okay.
That's right.
Which, for a young Italian kid at that era, was not easy to do. He just saved his money, got on a plane, went to England, basically.
I think he went with a girl. He didn't go with a girl?
He went with a girl, clothes on his back kind of thing. And just threw himself into the London scene. I mean, he saw T-Rex when they were just starting out. Okay.
Yeah, he did.
And, I guess he got the tail end of some of that 60s blues stuff that he, he came after Sonny Boy was gone, but, that stuff was still huge in England. So, yeah, I mean, you can hear it in Thunder's music. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
And, Hound Dog it seems like he's kind of one of these guys that knew how to play it, where if I just talk a big game, I'll be big. Okay. And he kind of had that attitude, which is cool. I think it's pretty cool.
Did you know that Iggy did something similar? He moved to Chicago because he wanted to be a blues musician.
Yes.
And he joined when he was a kid, and he tried to play. I guess he actually did jam at one point with Hound Dog, and he met Sam Lay, the drummer for Howlin' Wolf, and he met a bunch of these blues guys, hung out and tried to make the scene, and then he gave up on that and went back and decided to play rock and roll and formed a band called the Stooges.
Yeah, the blues influences on the Stooges kind of can't be ignored.
Iggy, I interviewed Iggy for the Sonny Boy thing, and you're gonna love this. Yeah, I did. He did a really good job of talking about Sonny Boy's style of music, of singing, like his stage presence and his lyrics and stuff like that. And we talked about that. And I sort of use him as an expert to critique his lyrics and his those films, just his stage show and what he did on stage. And so, but he told me, he said, and this is part of the interview, he said that the Stooges was basically really heavily built from the building blocks, is the word he used, of the blues. He said that TVI was communicating to Ron Ashton that was kind of like John Lee Hooker kind of style. And he said that I Want to Be Your Dog was like that lyric in Big Joe Williams. I want to be your baby. I want to be your.
I want to be your man. I want to be your
baby. Baby, please don't go. Yeah, please don't go. Yeah. And he said that dirt was another thing, and he didn't want to admit who it was. He goes, I'll give you a hint. It was a guy from New Orleans. So whatever. So he basically was heavily influenced by the blues, Iggy Pop.
Yeah, that's awesome. What else do we know about Hound Dog? Because I think he lived into the 70s.
Yeah, 72 he died. When he was 72. No, he died at 60.
He died early on, but I'm not as up on Hound Dog's history as I like to be. I should have I figured I was going to probably bring a cheat sheet, but then you guys will think I'm in nuts here looking at cheat sheets. Yeah. So I'm just going to say I'm not as big of a Hound Dog historian as I am Sonny Boy, where I can reel off the stuff like I've been doing with Sonny Boy. But he, who could do that would be Jim O'Neill, obviously. But the thing is, Hound Dog was there for this stuff. He was around. He played with all these guys from his recollection, and probably in reality from theirs, because Robert Lockwood knew who he was. All these guys, the guys who were around when interviews were being done. So he was there. And what he did and what he didn't do is hard to know. But he claimed he did a lot of things, and he might have done quite a few of them.
Wow,
cool.
But the proof when it comes to Hound Dog for me is the music, and you can't fake that. You can fake, where you were on a certain date when there's literally no way to disprove it or prove it, but you can't fake how good you are, and that's what.
Yeah, the little that I've heard of Hound Dog is pretty amazing. I'm not sure how much is out there, but the little that I've heard is just fantastic.
He recorded an album for, I think, Alligator Record. He did like in 2 days. It was Hound Dog Taylor and House Rockers, I think.
House Rockers. That's right. That's the only thing I know.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. He did a few different single stuff. He also appeared with a lot of other people. There's a really great video of him with Coco Taylor doing her classic Wang Dang Doodle with Little Walter on harp and Hound Dog.
Right, he played with Little Walter. That's right.
Yeah. And he played with Little Walter.
It was on the American Folk Blues Festival.
That's right.
He's another guy that I've gotten into a lot lately. Is Little Walter.
Oh, he's fantastic. Yeah. Well, Little Walter and Sonny Boy are kind of like, to me, they're like, like the Beatles and the Stones or the Dolls and the Stooges. They're like the A and B of that genre. Yeah, absolutely. Of harmonica player front guys that that basically pioneered and set the tone for the blues.
Absolutely.
Electric blues. Well,
Jim Basnight, I want to thank you for coming on and giving a tutorial on the blues here. Okay,
well, it's just the best thing ever. I mean, if it feels good, it's good for you, right?
Exactly. And you taught me a few things. I appreciate it. And you're amazing. You got this music career. You're working on this book for 12 years now. Looks like it's starting to, knock on wood, come together.
Yeah, it's coming together.
And you got to head back east so we can hang out, my man.
Well, I'm planning I really want to come back there. I'm talking to some people back there. There's an agent back there that I might be working with maybe, but I'm definitely open to anybody that wants to call because no one's really come together yet. But I would love to come back there and play some dates in New York and Boston and Philly and just the whole bit.
You know, I'll be there if you play New York, my friend.
Oh, I love it. I played New York a few times. Last time, unfortunately, was 2012, so it's been way too long.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a little different now. We've kind of not the same place anymore, unfortunately. But there's still some venues you can play.
It's funny about the whole rock and roll thing back there. Back then, they go. People saw us and go, "This is fantastic. I love rock and roll." And I go, "Well, who else is playing rock and roll? I'd like to hook up with some of these other bands." Well, I don't know. I guess the Dolls still around. It's like no one was doing it. Rock and roll became sort of not cool for some reason. I don't know why. And it's the same in Seattle, really. I mean, it's too bad, but there's probably. I don't know. There's rock and roll. There's still a lot of people that like rock and roll, man. There still is.
It's gone underground in a lot of ways. You have some good bands out there. You have to really look for them. But
anytime you have a rock and roll show in Madison Square Garden, it's sold out.
It's packed.
Yeah.
People want to see the live music still. It's
the thing is the only thing that ever gets out there though is like these acts that have done it. Where's the new bands? Where's the new bands coming up doing it? And that's the thing. Gene Simmons, he's been quoted recently saying, "Well, it died because they stopped giving advances to new artists to do it. Without money, it's hard to do. Like with the Sonny Boy thing, it's like I had to put that on the side until I got somebody to help me get the money because I got to make money to pay my rent and things like that. So I have to go out there playing gigs all the time and doing whatever I can do to make a living. And so the fact that I got a backer to help me finish writing this book is why it exists. Otherwise, how do you do it?
Yeah.
I know it's so hard. Okay, Jim. So thanks again for joining us on our big 200th episode of the Rock Show. Very excited that you were part of this.
Well, fantastic.
We want to thank all our fans for always being there. We've been doing this for 5 years now.
Yeah.
And we got
you got a sponsor?
No, off and on we've done some things, but we don't have a sponsor for this show.
So you're doing it yourself. I did a sports podcast called Talking Hoops. I should have stuck with it. Those things are making big money now.
I know.
But I don't got time. I don't got time for that. You got to make choices in life. I decided to go with Sonny Boy and my own stuff, and that's kind of that's where it's at.
But that makes you happy.
You guys are doing the right thing. Stick with the podcast. It's the future, man.
I think so. I think so. And it's a slow burn, and we got all the time in the world, so it's fine.
It's the future.
You know? And this is episode 200. We've already got more episodes than the Odd Couple. More, more episodes than like.
I won't make a couple jokes about you guys, but I could.
Hey, we definitely got more episodes than the original Star Trek and the Honeymooners.
That's all the Honeymooners. We got 4 times as many episodes as the Honeymooners. We're doing something right. We didn't get canceled yet.
Too bad.
All right, Jim. Thank you so much, Jim Basnight. And what do we say at the end of every show, Rob?
We don't get drunk.
We get lumped up.
We'll see you next time.
Take care, you guys. Have a good one. Should I just plug it? Okay, I'll shut it.
That was good.
Yeah.